an organizer. Now we are streaming live on YouTube. Fantastic. Well, once again, welcome everyone. This panel is called The Earth is Not a Commodity. The Sixth Fest, you can see here and here, I'm covered in it, this is the inaugural year. It is an arts festival organized in response to the climate emergency, also called the climate crisis. And it's a series of events, panels like this, streaming films, some yoga in the park, some theater, some play readings, all in response to the sixth mass extinction event, which we're currently undergoing. We have a lot of really cool events still coming up on our calendar, so check it out at thesixthfest.org/events. That's where you can register. Everything is free, so please come out. If you're in the Chicago area this weekend, we have some fun events happening in Buttercup Park in Uptown. Before I introduce my incredible guest that I'm so grateful to have here tonight, I'm going to read a brief land acknowledgement. We're holding this festival about the climate emergency on the traditional homelands of the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi people. Illinois is also the home of the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Anoka, Menominee, Sauk, and Fox peoples. This is not only the ancestral home, but the current home of Native peoples. There are over 75,000 tribal members alone in Illinois, many living in Chicago. I and the Sixth Fest are strong supporters of divestment, or returning the stolen land to its original protectors, to structures. Reach out if you would like to learn more about some action steps to fight against that. And now I'd like to introduce my illustrious guests. I'll do a short intro and then I'll give you the soapbox for a moment. My first guest here is Dr. Peter Schwartzman, Professor of Environmental Studies at Knox College. He holds a PhD in Environmental Sciences from the University of Virginia, MSc in Science and Philosophy from Harvey Mudd. He currently serves as alderman and mayor-elect, congratulations, 5 times. I'm overwhelmed. My next incredible guest is Nicholas Mink, the CEO and co-founder of Sitka Salmon Shares, a direct-to-incredible book, The Earth is Not for Sale. So thank you both so much for being here tonight. And I understand you know each other already from Galesburg.
Peter was my boss. Zoom. Peter was my boss. Still kind of is a little bit.
Oh, no way. So, no, we met on a Zoom. And now that I think about it, before Zoom was Zoom. We interviewed Nick in our department. What year was that, Nick?
It was 2010.
Okay. So, what do you know? We returned.
Back from whence you came.
Circle.
Right? Well, that's very exciting. So, Peter, you started the Environmental Studies Department at Knox College and then hired Nick to come on as a guest lecturer. What was it like starting an environmental studies department, the two of you? I mean, what were the challenges?
Well, so I was really wet behind the ears. I was coming out of University of Virginia. I had experiences with high school students through a program called Upward Bound that many people may know about. And that really gave me the fire for teaching. My father's a professor, I must admit, and a very good one, but he taught in a big school and I went to his classes and I was very young at the time. And I really didn't see that as real employment for me. And I actually resisted becoming a professor for a long time. But then working with those high school students really gave me, we fought for positions and because there was just so much interest at that period. Students were just, filling my classes to the point, and I was getting tired of grading too many students at a time. So I had to get some help. So Nick was one of the helpers that we reached out to, and his story is fascinating as well. I mean, just absolutely fascinating what he's been able to do, not only with his own research, but then his business. And it's really, he's hired, I'll say this publicly. I've said it privately to many people. He's probably hired more Knox students than anyone else in the United States. So the college owes him an honorary degree, and I hope they give him one soon.
I'm waiting for it.
This is the official call out for Knox College. Let's do it. Yeah. That's fantastic. So many youth-led orgs now are really leading the way in the environmental activist fight, Sunrise Movement, and of course the incredibly photogenic Greta Thunberg has been on. I mean, it's incredible to see so many young people leading it. So that's very inspiring. And then after academia, you kind of went into separate areas to serve your environmental causes. Peter, you kind of went into the public service arena, and Nick, you went to the business side. So I wanted to start off with kind of a broad question for both of you, and I'd love to have a conversation about this. But big government and big business is often seen as, and is the real kind of opponent or enemy, to put it, bluntly, in this environmental fight. And they're causing a lot of problems. So how does local government and local business, small government and small business, how do we counteract that? How are they actually allies in the fight, in the environmental fight? And Nick, why don't we start with you on the business side of things?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, and Peter knows this, I started off doing nonprofit work. I spent, actually, when Peter hired me, I had spent the last few years working at a small environmental nonprofit, and had various nonprofit jobs for most of my graduate school career, largely like working at the intersection of natural resource use and policy, and trying to put good policy in place to protect local and regional natural resources. And I ended up becoming more fascinated or more excited about using business as a tool to produce environmental change, because I liked what I saw as the speed that I could affect change with in using for-profit business. And I also really enjoyed the ability, the power that came with it. Not necessarily for me, but like the power that comes with capitalism and the way that it can really transform environments and transform ecologies. And I can't say that I would want to go back to the nonprofit world. I've really enjoyed, capitalism is, for better or worse, right now, capitalism is how we use our natural resources, right? Mm-hmm. It's how we interact with the environment. It's the dominant paradigm that we see the world in. And, do you kind of work in the NGO world, or you work in the local government world and try to be an interface with capitalism to affect that change? I ended up finding a lot of pleasure and a lot of having a lot of fun, working within the system and trying to affect change from within it. But, it is all the bad things that people say it is, in many ways.
Yeah.
When you look at how some businesses are run, when you look at, the marginalization of workers, the destruction of natural resources, how, really industrial capitalism subjugates everything in its path. And, it's been a learning curve too. In how do you take these forces of capitalism? How do you take the logic and nature of capitalism and try to bend it a little bit so that you can use its power to produce social and environmental outcomes? In the case of Sitka salmon shares, building a system that looks at, how do we, I guess it would be called upstream more wealth into the hands of small, traditionally marginalized producers? How do you create incentives for lower impact harvesting, and doing all of that within the constraints of this kind of, this system, which has, really serious warts. And, but I've generally enjoyed the ride, and I'm kind of transitioning to some new opportunities right now. And I love the idea of thinking about how capitalism can be used and business can be used as a force for good.
Yeah, so how in Lord of the Rings, where they bring out the ring, right? And Boromir is like, we should use the ring. It's a gift to the enemies of Mordor. And Aragorn says, no, you can't use the ring because it answers to one master, right? So you're kind of on the side of Boromir, where he says, yes, we can use this thing that is sort of essentially evil. It can be used to sort of destroy itself, right? Yeah. Peter, would you agree with that?
It's a good question. I don't know if I have the full answer, and I'm not, and that's one of the lovely things that I share with my students is that I don't have all the answers at all, and I'm still searching for the answers. I think I think we have to work with the tools we have, but we're reinventing tools all the time. And so, yeah, I think this idea that we could just escape capitalism and pretend like it doesn't exist and fight it, to its death. I don't think that's not a solution I want to be a part of. I think that's going to be way too bloody and way too miserable for particularly people at the bottom, right? So my solution, to the extent I understand it, is to, like you were referring to, like, let's do things at the local level. One of the things I learned early on in my education, teaching, see, I was a climatologist by training, but when I really started teaching classes and having to teach a lot of classes, and because I had students wanting to learn everything, and for the first 10 years, I was really the only professor there that they had within the department to learn things from. So I had to really brush up and do all this great reading. But long story short, so what I learned is the power of institutions, right? And government is one of the most powerful institutions, especially in terms of money. And I'm thinking of too, like, everyone complains about their taxes. Okay, not everyone, but many people complain about the taxes.
Sure.
Or anytime you buy anything, right? There are taxes associated with that, many of which you don't even know. So where does that money go? Well, that goes into the government, right? So what does the government do with all this money? All this money that comes out of my paycheck before I even see it, and then money that when I buy things. So becoming part of the government, now having been, a city councilor for 10 years, I see we have like $25 million of expendable cash, and we can decide what we want to do with it.
Power.
So for instance, let's put it to good. And Galesburg's done this a little bit, but I think you can do it in a much bigger way. So let me just give you a couple quick examples. Okay. If we promote local spending, so in the case of food, if every citizen in Galesburg, there's about 30,000 of us, spent $5 more a week on local food, so that's $20 a month. That would inject $8 million more into the community, right? That is huge. That is a huge amount of money. That's about a fourth of the city's total annual budget. Okay, so that's a giant amount of money, and that money, once you spend it locally, it supports local workers, it supports local economies. It's called a virtuous cycle. It gets respent, and everybody benefits. Okay, so that's a small change, but the government can assist in promoting that through the local farmers market, through advertising, through statements at council meetings, through links on our website, right? So there are a lot of things that we can do to promote local. Educate children. Now, the city, you might say, well, that's not the city's responsibility as a city government. Well, we can coordinate. We have youth programs. We have recreational programs. We have parks. And we have a nature center. Why can't that be built up? And what we're instilling in children is not just like the love of nature, which I think is critically important as we look towards the sixth extinction, and we'll talk about that more. But it's instilling them a sense of connection with each other, with their local environment, with the local history. We have a lot of really amazing history in Galesburg that most of us don't know because it's not shared enough. And I mean, Nick is a history professor.
I was going to say, yeah, that's your area, isn't it, Nick?
Exactly. Another thing, we know that many people in our community are struggling economically, right? But they're not sure what to do. Well, the government can play a role in encouraging them to do things that will invest for them into the future, like weatherization of their homes. So it's cold in Galesburg in the wintertime. If we weatherize the homes, we probably can save them $100 to $200 a month on energy bills in the winter months. Small investments in weatherization. Now, what can that do? The government's not going to do all that work, but what the government can do, it can go out and get grants. It can support businesses that bring that to Galesburg and then encourage those kinds of activities. And we can show them the nuts and bolts of the economic dynamics of that. Solar energy, right? I'm a big proponent of solar energy, and I've worked on getting a lot of that in Galesburg. Our superintendent of schools as well, who is someone I know, but he is a big enthusiast in this area and has saved the school district tons of money because of this. And it's the future. It reduces pollution globally. It provides more jobs. It's a net savings. One thing people don't know, it's in the book that we wrote, my father and I. When you transition to solar energy, you reduce energy needs by about 30%. Now you might say, well, how is that possible? Well, it's because when you burn coal and oil to make electricity, the efficiency there is so low that you're literally wasting most of that. Like 60% of it is just wasted. It just goes into heat into the atmosphere. If you use solar panels to create energy, it's direct energy. There's no loss of heat and so forth. So we actually can reduce, when people talk about reducing our footprint 30%, going to solar does it immediately, independent of all the other good things.
Right.
We have so many open lots in our cities now, right? There's been a depopulation throughout the country in most urban areas. Those urban lots, particularly in Galesburg, have some of the richest soil in the world. So why not put those to productive use? And I will say, I don't take the mayor's position until May 3rd, next week. But last weekend, due to some interested parties, I was out in an open lot getting it tilled, and it hasn't been used. That lot has not been used for productive purposes since I was born. And I heard that story from an 80-year-old man who happened to walk by. And it was just so like exciting to see how that land can be used productively. It had been used mowed. It had been mowed. That's all. And so there's all of this amazing resources that we have that the government can assist. So what I would suggest we do, and I'm going to be pushing for this, is that we can have some job training. We can have some incentives to revitalize these open lots. The city, by the way, if lots do not get, if they're not owned or they're not taken care of, guess who mows them? The city does at their own expense. So why not take that money from the mowing fund and move it into the production fund? And that's one of my, one of the first actual acts that I'm going to try to implement in Galesburg. And I can't do it as mayor. We be clear, the mayor in Galesburg, the city manager is the boss. I'm more of a figurehead, but I'm also like the enthusiast and the catalyst.
Sure.
So anyway.
Sure. Well, the person in front of the camera has the power, right? So that's fantastic. Yes. Now, I want to come back to the idea that you both mentioned about incentives to behave in a more low impact way for people. But first, Peter, you mentioned the using empty lots for production, this idea of community supported agriculture, CSA, right? Nick, you've kind of taken CSA to the ocean. Can you talk to me a little bit about fast fish versus slow fish and community supported food gathering and food production?
Yeah, so when you think about, one of the biggest challenges we have in food production, whether it's agriculture or or fisheries, or sometimes it's even more it's food artisan. Breweries are doing it now, and one of the, I think, real challenges in our marketplace is the fact that there's historically so much risk in growing food, harvesting food, gathering food, catching food. And historically, that risk has fallen onto the shoulders of either larger and larger governments or larger and larger corporations that can diversify and basically mitigate that risk through diversification. And one of the beauties, I think, of kind of community supported food systems is how they allow consumers acting together in order to share that risk, to be able to share the risk with the producers of their food, right? And we've had community supported agriculture and what I mean by that, right, is if a harvest, people paying up front for their food or paying monthly. And if a harvest fails or something doesn't materialize in the way that things, which that producer thought it would, there's an opportunity for those consumers to share that risk, right? And community supported agriculture has been around since the 1980s, as people were kind of like, the back to the land movement, 60s, 70s, and then a lot of those back to land people actually went back to the city or back to the suburbs, but still had that ethos, right? And still wanted to connect with their food producer. And they began doing so both in the South and in the Northeast and the Midwest by kind of forming, they're kind of consumer cooperatives, buying cooperatives, linking themselves with a local farmer and, getting food direct from the source. And the concept with community supported fisheries is the exact same thing, which is, beginning about 15 years ago in Maine, a community started working with its local fishermen in a place called Port Clyde and started, creating these new local connections between the harvesters of their seafood and being able to buy their and buying seafood. And it's super unique because seafood is the most highly traded commodity on earth, even more than oil.
Whoa.
And it's most of our seafood is anything but local. Most of it is part of this export economy that goes to China before it comes back to the United States, or travels to South America and then to the South Pacific Islands and back to the United States. And this just became a way for consumers to connect with a really important part of their food source, which is seafood. And more than 1 billion people on the planet, their primary food source is seafood. And there are one of the unique things that's happened in the United States in the last 150 years is that, we've lost this primary connection to eating fish in a way that we used to. And had been replaced by more industrial agricultural products, which we all know that story, right? Mm. And so we just there were already a couple of dozen community supported fisheries operating when a fisherman and a few of his friends and a couple of Knox students and I kind of formed this unique community supported fishery to link these small scale fishermen in Alaska to consumers, eaters in the Midwest. And since then, we've grown to, we're probably up to about 100 fishermen who will fish for us this summer, and then tens of thousands of people. But we still embrace that community supported aspect. I mean, I don't know how you can do wild seafood harvest and not embrace it. Meaning, we don't provide what the harvest will be. We have guidelines. We don't exactly know what the poundage will be. And we can provide a direct benefit to these seafood producers, right? An incentive to leave more fish in the ocean, and the fish that they do harvest, they're spending more time taking care of. I mean, fish is this incredibly perishable ingredient and incredibly perishable natural resource. And, unfortunately, when a lot of these small boats, they have to compete against the large guys, and they're forced into what's kind of generally called the volume trap, which is instead of fishing for value and harvesting fish individually and taking good care of them, they're harvesting fish for volume. And that's where, of course, you get into the problems with the commodification of nature and the degradation of natural resources, which is like, how do we get away? I have a thing up on my computer that says, we harvest fish, not commodities. And there's all these different ways in which you can keep a fish, and there's all these different ways in which you can keep turn a fish into a commodity. And it's something that we really strive to not do at Sitka, even as we've gotten bigger and as more of the sinews of industrial capitalism, make their way into the company. But to me, community supported food systems, whether they're agriculture, whether it's seafood, whether it's, there's quite a few community supported breweries in Madison now, community supported bakeries, linking together producer and consumer in order to not only share the risks of harvest or share the risks of food production, but also share in its benefits, share in its joy, share in the beauty and the conviviality of like food that's been grown well and harvested well and produced well, and how that nourishes in a much more holistic way than the broader food system can provide.
That the process itself can be something of value.
Oh,
that people will
yeah.
spend time and money to,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could be a good time. Richie, would you mind pulling up the Sitka Salmon Shares website real quick to show to our audience? So here's the Sitka Salmon Shares website, and here is a page where you can actually see the people who are catching your fish. These are the fishermen. It has their names, it has their faces, it has their boats. This to me was sort of one of the most transcendent parts of the slow fish process. Here they are. These are the people. It has stories about them. Putting a human face on something, I think, sort of instantly decommodifies it in a way that is really easy to connect to. And thank you so much, Richie. We can go back to us now. Thanks. And this sort of ties into what you were both talking about in terms of the incentives for people. They may not be receiving their resources as quickly. And that will be really hard for modern consumers, right? As in the days of Amazon, we expect everything immediately on our doorstep, and we expect, a certain quality. Actually, I don't even know. I feel like we don't even expect very high quality. We just want a lot of stuff fast, because even if it's low quality, we can just get something else much faster. So Peter, I wanted to go back to you, and you've been behind so many incredible campaigns for environmental causes. What would you say was one of the most successful ones in terms of people getting excited about it and putting it into action quickly? Like what was that? What was that campaign?
Well, it's really interesting because what I'm going to talk about briefly is food related. And this is long before I really became educated about food. This was almost about the time when Nick came to Knox. And it's just occurred to me, epiphany maybe, that perhaps Nick is more to blame for my interest in food than anyone else. But back in 2010, I believe it was, four of us met for lunch. Three of us didn't know each other because we heard that the local schools were going to close for 2 weeks in January. So this is October, and they were going to close in January for 2 weeks because they wanted to reduce their heating bill. And we thought, well, we know that 70% of the kids are getting free reduced lunch and then even potentially breakfast. So that's, where are those 70% of the kids going to get food for 2 weeks? So we thought, well, okay, we don't know, but let's think about it. And we took that idea, and that was in October. So we had about 2 months, maybe 2.5 months to prepare. And we just started talking to other people. And lo and behold, the first day that break took place, we had about 30 people in an old gymnasium making sandwiches and making bags and delivering them to 13 locations in our city. And it was called the Lunch Spot. That's what it was called. And it was an incredible thing. I'd never been part of such a thing like that. Just come together, people from all walks of life. And we didn't have any money. It wasn't like one of us just had all the money and we just plopped it down on the table. We just got donations, and people brought us things, and the grocery stores gave us things, and volunteers just came out of nowhere. And I was one of the drivers to take the meals to the locations. And I would see kids and families coming out of their cars or walking to the locations, getting sandwiches. And it was just such a powerful thing to see, how thankful they were, how much they appreciated what the meals were. And the first week, it was rudimentary meals, but by the second week, we had kind of honed our skills, and we were able to make the meals more exciting and fun, and diversify the diet and introduce some new foods. And So it was just a fabulous experience. And so then that was just 2 weeks. And then it was over, right? And we had a little bit of extra cash that we had collected, and we didn't know what to do with it. And we could have just given it to another, food organization in town. We had quite a few. But we thought, come on, well, we could do that, but we have so much energy here. Maybe we could do something else. And so we sat around for a few months, and we ended up creating what is now called the Knox Prairie Community Kitchen, which is an organization, nonprofit, that has 2 sit-down meals a month in our community. And everyone's invited. And that's been running now for 11 years. And it's fabulous. It's an amazing experience. We had to shut it down for a few months during COVID, but now we actually have, we don't have sit down yet. We hope to, but we have people coming to pick up meals. And they have lines of people, and we've had to have police come and like direct traffic to ensure that people get the food. So it's a huge event, right?
Yeah.
Our meal, and our cooks are so good, which is part of the draw. But just to see again the people, but I will say this has been an incredibly valuable community event, and it's something that didn't exist, and now it exists, and I'm so glad to be part of it still. But it's a Band-Aid, okay? It's not the solution. And this is what Nick's talking about too, right? Like we need Band-Aids to stop the bleeding, but we need to build solutions. And we are building solutions. I mean, it's going to take time. We're creating opportunities. So for instance, KPCK, that's the group I just mentioned, there are opportunities perhaps to have them do cooking lessons when COVID comes out, or actually do events at like local farms, and then create connections there. So it's not that the Band-Aid is not critically important. It's like the ship that's sinking. You have to stop the leak, right? But then eventually you got to get to shore, right? And so we need to find ways to do that. And what I love about Nick's work is he has created a way for that to occur, like on a broader scale, right? We don't have salmon growing or living in Galesburg, So, but it's really important that people in Galesburg know about what's going on in our fisheries on a global scale. And that's where the act locally, think, what is it? Act locally, think globally,
Right,
whatever.
yeah.
It goes both directions. The both directions are important. But it's a really important, so it has to happen on multiple fronts. There is no cure to this. Like, it's not a panacea. It's a multi-stage movement, and everybody's going to get involved. And that's the beauty of it, little by little. And we're all making a contribution. And that's, a lesson that we can all take from, a lot of my students, I feel a lot of young people have a lot of like fear of the future, and they're almost paralyzed by it. And they also, you mentioned Amazon, like they are been taught that there are immediate solutions to things. Like if they're unhappy, go get ice cream. Okay, that solves that problem. But that's not the broader solution for humanity, right? Or for the planet. And that's going to take time, but you can still make a contribution, and you can see that contribution grow. And I mean, what Nick has been able to do in 10 years, I mean, is just case in point.
Yeah. Well, and I think it goes back to the importance of giving people a sense of ownership, of stewardship of a cause. And like you were saying, an incentive is making sure that people are there in person with each other so they can experience that sort of incredible wave of empathy and compassion and love that comes from, protecting your home and protecting the people in your home, in your, town. So that's a huge incentive. Children, obviously, if we can get people focused on, this might not be for us, but it's for the next generation, it's for kids. That's a huge incentive. And then so what you were just saying, what Nick does of I'm so sorry, Peter, what was that? I got really wrapped up in it.
No, I know, it's fun. I mean, it's there's a lot of life in here, right? And
Yeah.
And that sometimes it's almost, you can't put words on it. I mean, that's the
Well,
part of the experience.
Right. The importance of being in person and actually getting somebody like in the room with you, which is increasingly hard, of course, being online, but we're doing our best. Panels are the next step, and then we'll be back in the room together. Nick, I wanted to go back to what you were talking about the idea of stewardship. That's what I was talking about. What would you say you feel you are the steward of in your work? And how would you suggest other people kind of choose a stewardship? How do people feel ownership over the environment and over their home?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It's a big one.
And I've gotten all nervous too, because I was saying I'm like almost 12 hours into my second vax, and I've been thinking, I just go down right now.
Oh, no.
If you've seen Old School, right? I think it's Old School, where he's shot by a tranquilizer. No, I mean, to me, I have always been somebody who is, I think there's something amazing about kind of really being rooted or connected in place, right? This idea of place and having, it's, to me, stewardship is kind of like the moral ownership of a place, right? And not in like this capitalist sense of ownership, right? But in the sense of like spiritual use, utility, community, family. And, I've always felt like, and Peter does this actually way better than I've ever done, is like, find your place, right? Make it your home. And spend your time, turning it into a place that's healthier, more livable, provides more opportunity for people, creates new synergies between like the natural world and the people who live there. And I think that to me is like the root of being a good steward of your environment is really getting to be connected to a place and knowing a place. And like, I've kind of, on a much smaller scale than Peter, being able to do this in this little fishing village in Alaska, where really my whole life has kind of just been dedicated to like this, allowing fishermen who do the right thing to be empowered to basically utilize and protect natural resources in a way that's going to be that those resources will be there for generations. And there's like, sometimes there's a disconnect to be like, well, wait a minute, these are fishers, these are like murderers of the sea. But in actuality, like at their core, they are there as, stewards or protectors of the resource, because they want to see this resource be able to not just be there for them today, but in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years or 50 years. I mean, if you guys have seen kind of the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy, which has kind of gotten popular in the last like 30 days and, all over the place, is that like, these big industrial fisheries or industrial farming, they want to kind of divorce that place from its environment and like just create something that is totally homogenized, which is like going and catching as many fish as you can, no matter where they are, or harvesting as, and putting commodity crops or row crops as far as the eye can see. And to me, like, that's the opposite of being a steward. And, I think it really comes down to like a placedness in all we do, right? Going back to like capitalism, industrial capitalism, it is a placeless beast. The only thing that place matters for, right, is the natural resource that's going to be harvested. And so that's kind of how I see stewardship is having a really holistic connection to a place. and feeling ownership of it and knowing how it changes. And like, there's something so magical about like understanding a place through its seasons. And, you know, you wonder how technology is going to shape this, and you wonder how changing, you know, kind of parts of society are going to change us. I mean, like, I wonder, I just sit around all the time and be like, oh, what is spending 18 months on Zoom going to do for all of us and our connections to play? And I don't know, like Peter says, I don't know if I have answers to those questions, but I feel it like kind of urgently brewing in my heart about like, well, how are people going to think about place and stewardship differently in the next 20 or 30 years, particularly the students in the last decade that have grown up in basically the Great Recession straight into, you know, Trump straight into this pandemic. You know, this is going to be a profoundly powerful 15 years of shaping like a lot of our students that are kind of in our classes right now. And they're going to see place much different than we do. They're going to see stewardship much differently than we do. But, and when I say me, probably, you know, I'm in my 40s now, but, you know, I do think there is something magical and powerful about connection to place.
Yeah. It sounds like one of the kind of, you know, solution, not a Band-Aid, but an actual solution, is to focus on getting people to think smaller and slower. And most of us live in cities now. Most human beings live in cities, and it feels huge, but we live in neighborhoods. And what's cool about living in a city like Chicago, especially, most neighborhoods have such a personality. I live in like uptown Andersonville kind of area, and it does. I mean, there are co-ops and there are chambers of commerce, and there are ways to get involved just in your local space. You don't have, I mean, of course, we have to be doing it for a global reason, but if we maybe stop thinking globally so much and start to think locally, we can kind of get people to focus back on the relationships. And I think, that could be a way to decommodify our lives a little bit, I would hope. Like you were saying, this has been a really scary time for a lot of young people. The question for both of you, but Peter, I'll ask you first. You believe that a lot of the damage that's been done can be reversed. What gives you hope right now?
So the subtitle of my book is A Path Out of Fossil Capitalism to the Other World That Is Still Possible. So for sure, one of the things we have to de-brainwash ourselves, okay? We've been brainwashed to think that we become happy when we consume things, okay? And that we have to deprogram ourselves. We have to deprogram this notion also that we know what we can do and what we can't do. Because I don't think we have a clue, frankly, what we're capable of. And I can tell you this because you can look at examples. I just posted one of my things on Facebook. There's a project called Al-Baydah, it's spelled A-L space B-A-Y-D-H-A. Baydah project, Al-Baydah project in Saudi Arabia. And the person's name, Neil Spackman, was this Westerner who moved to rural part of Saudi Arabia to basically take up shop in a desert, which had previously, not too long ago, had massive trees. And prior to that, had a burgeoning agricultural enterprise, but had since been desolate. And all he had was rocks, elevation or orography, and perhaps a few inches of rain a year if he was lucky. And that group, through multiple years, through working on days that were 50 degrees Celsius, they figured out a way to bring like plant life, trees back into that environment. It's a 20-minute video. It will blow your mind. And one of the closing thoughts he said is, you know, we need to begin thinking about ourselves as a keystone species. And if we do that, we have incredible potential to reshape environment, but we let environments decide. Now, let me give you an example from this video. So they did this work, and then they went through a period of almost no rain for a couple of years, and they had made so much progress. And people in the community were like, well, let's go get some water. We need water. These trees are going to die. These trees are going to die. And he said, no, if these trees die, then this is not the solution. And he held out and he held out and he held out. And guess what? The rains finally came. And this is all within the last 10 years. This is a story that everyone in the world should know. Because if you can create a forest, an edible forest in a desert, you can obviously transform any other environment we can think of on planet Earth, perhaps other than Antarctica. And most of us don't live there. So the amount of potential, and I think of this in terms of a child. Think of a child who has had, limited experience in life. What we teach them, what we show them, what we feed them, that's what they know. That's what they're going to want. That's what they're going to expect. That's what their dreams. If we bring them up in an environment that is dangerous, where they're fed junk, where there's all these other calamities going on, they're going to be tortured mentally and physically. But we know that if that child is properly cared for and loved, like probably the three of us were, there's unlimited potential. How many children are there in the world right now? Probably 3 billion, something like that. I mean, I'm making numbers up. I'm supposed to know this stuff, but I don't know the exact number. But let's say it's 3 billion. There's 3 billion. Start counting now. How long would it take to get there? It would take you the rest of your life. So the point is, that's incredible potential. So what are we going to do with that? That's a resource. I don't mean in a commodity. It's not a commodity. It's a resource for the future. So what kinds of environments are we going to create for these kids, right? Because they're the ones ultimately that are going to have to absorb all these toxins that we put in the environment the last 100 years, right? They're the ones that are going to have to deal with the challenges of climate change, which, of course, the sooner we act, the bad it will be. But it's still currently very problematic in many parts of the world. And so, to me, that's when I talk about hope, there is the hope. To think there's not hope, that's one example. There's another person I want to mention, John Liu. He's done this in parts of China and Rwanda. He took previously extremely productive land that had been desertified because of modern industrial practices, agricultural practices, and within 5 years restored the land. So if we can do that, then we can turn any community into a lush, beautiful, beneficial, edible landscape. And it's not that difficult. The idea that it's difficult, to me, is just shows our hubris and our lack of imagination.
Imagination, huge resource, I think, in decommodification, right? We have to be able to think outside of what we know. Nick, same question. What gives you hope right now?
Yeah, Peter hit on it, which is not tying our happiness to consumerism and consumption. And I feel that actually more and more people are embracing that philosophy. I mean, more and more of my students, when I first started teaching 15 or 16 years ago, when we tie our happiness to what we buy and what we consume, we don't have, we cede control of our happiness to marketers, to big business. And actually they make their money by sowing in us doubts about who we are, about like, our own, general, philosophies in life, getting us to think that we have to be somebody different, getting us to think that, the bonds of family and humor and community aren't what should drive us. And so, I mean, that does give me hope, because I do think that more and more people are turning away from, consumption as a means of happiness. And I'll give you like actually a flip side of this too, which I've been thinking about and talking about a lot. I really used to think that when I first started this, I did not think, when I first started Salmon Shares, I was highly skeptical of the idea of green business, especially at the level of large scale, of larger businesses. And I feel like that's changing. I think there's new business leaders in the United States who, they're in their 20s and 30s. They're now starting to just get to like the their first executive jobs. And a lot of them they're legit. And they legitimately feel like, as a business person, one of their core jobs is to tackle climate change, is to tackle diversity and inclusion, and to tackle the inequities of society. With the caveat being, of course, businesses caused all of those things, but that gives me hope too. That I'm seeing younger business leaders in the heads of, in charge of really pretty big companies, where like that's core to who they are. And when you think of like, well, how can you affect change like at a wide scale, rapid, in a wide scale, in a large scale, rapid way? It's big business. There's and I didn't feel that way, 15 years ago, but I'm really starting to feel like there's just a lot of young business executives out there that like really do think it's businesses' job to tackle some of these societal issues and to tackle some of these environmental issues. And I actually think that's one of the big reasons why you're starting to see even big business turn away from the Republican Party, because the social issues and environmental issues of our day are really, instead of being kind of antithetical to business and perhaps even to money making, are at the core of them. So those would be my two things that give me hope. Is I believe I've seen, couch that a little bit, but I believe I've seen business change quite a bit in the last 10 or 15 years, even big business, and people who aren't wrapping their happiness in consumption.
That's very heartening to hear, I have to admit, because as like a young progressive person who has really, I mean, I've never been a Republican, to be frank, and I've really fallen out of love with the Democrats at this point. It's really easy to get discouraged by leadership and the examples that we're seeing in business. Mostly when we think about business, we think Amazon and Bill Gates and these people that are gatekeepers of power and money. And to hear that actually power and money are not the enemies, it's power and money in the wrong hands. Mm-hmm. And that maybe power and money in the hands of the younger generation is going to be used in a better way. That's exciting to hear. I want to remind people watching now that you can ask questions. You can write your questions into the chat, and then we'll be able to see them. So start writing some questions in there, and then in a couple of minutes we can go and take a look and see if there are any in there, and we can answer them for you. They can be about anything, these are very smart people here on our panel. So you need money advice or stocks or something like that. We'll get into it. Now, I suppose to go back a little bit, we were talking about incentives for low impact living. We talked about, Peter, you said if people spent only $5 a week on local food, the huge impact that would make. And that's a really small, I mean, most of us are sending at least $5 a week to various, community support efforts, or donating to friends, or donating to shows that we want to see happen. We can spend $5 a week on something. So that's like a really cool action item. Are there any like small action items you can think of like that, or like weatherizing the homes, focusing on, it's not a sexy cause, but it turns out it's a really important one, and it's easy to do. Are there any other little causes like that, or little action items that we can do, if we don't own giant corporations, but that the people watching at home could do? That's a question for either one of you.
Peter's the master of this. Dude, get involved with a community organization. Yeah. Find one that you think is cool and unique, and trust. Peter knows, Peter will say this too, like they're yearning for young blood that care and that want to do something. And to me, that's so much more powerful than, in my view, than just giving a little money or, riding your bicycle instead of taking the car, right. Because you're creating social fabric. You're you're amplifying your good, I think, when you're part of a group, and, civic participation, right? Like at its core is like who we should be as Americans in a democracy. And, I think it's a great way to get to do something good, is to just find an organization whose mission you really support. I have two in Madison that I, really, really love, that do great work in the food system. One's a little bit more focused on farmers, and one's a little bit more focused on eaters and equity and health. But, they were the 5 hours a week that I spend, doing work for them is like, it's moving the dial. It's creating a better community. And it's, you're creating new friends too. Like I've got all these, I got these buds, that I can hang out with, who are not only like-minded in many ways, but also come from really different backgrounds. And they're not people, I mean, Peter knows this, they're not people that are in the academic sphere, or the people who I traditionally roll with in like the business world, like all walks of life, all stations in life, different, from business people to teachers to lawyers to like, community food activists. It's awesome. And it's an incredibly rewarding investment of your time.
I completely agree. Just getting involved in this festival, I've met so many people, so many community organizers. Just doing a park cleanup relieved my climate anxiety enormously, because that's all you can do. I mean, you can't really do more than like take care of your little patch of ground, right? And I was like, okay, I'm doing something. Great. My anxiety was gone. That was, yeah, absolutely. Peter, do you have any?
Well, I would echo everything Nick said. I think I'd add two little pieces to it. One is, work from your strengths if you can. Like, because if you love something and you're good at something, you can share that with someone else, and your passion and your like just inspiration will be contagious, right? So you and everybody has some of that to share, and be comfortable doing that. Secondly, like take on occasion, and maybe even if this is something you don't do, step outside your comfort zone. You got to go across into a different neighborhood, not as a teacher, not as the expert, but as a person who wants to bridge gaps, who wants to understand, a person who wants to help, support in whatever way they need, right? Because to me, especially in Chicago, right, you do have your separate neighborhoods. I'm familiar with Chicago pretty well, but there also are kind of divides, and those divides keep us separate. And that's what allows certain things to take place in the political realm, because certain groups or certain people or certain neighborhoods are considered expendable, right? And as long as the crimes, the murders, and the negative stuff happens in certain areas, we just go about our lives, when in reality, if any of those things happened in our space, we would be freaking out, right? We would be, this is not acceptable. We are not going to let this happen. But honestly, it's happening probably within a mile of where we all live. It is. So we have to look at ourselves in a bigger or wider group. And one of the things that environmentalism still, is not the word that many people are using when they're going out and doing good, right? They're talking about social justice. They're talking about, all causes about domestic abuse, causes about illness, health, and all of these things are interconnected. And so sometimes you have to go outside of that environmental bubble to really participate in a broader network and then be the like the mycelia, like that connects everything together. And I use that term. So what we learned, I mean, I said earlier that we don't really know much about anything. Well, here's an example. So only recently in the last 50 years did we realize that trees on one side of the house are connected to trees on the other side of town, okay? Through an underground network of mycelia. They're communicating. They have their own internet, okay? It doesn't go down when there's a lightning storm, right? It doesn't wait for the electrician to come and fix it. It fixes itself. So the point is recognizing that we as human beings, when I was talking about being a keystone species, we could be the mycelia. Think of yourself, take inspiration from them. I didn't know what mycelia was when I started teaching environmental studies, right? But through my, just reading and watching YouTube, and this is another thing I tell my students, and it's hard for them to relate. Like, I didn't have internet when I was their age. It didn't exist. It wasn't just because I was poor. They didn't exist. So like, you have all of these amazing tools.
Yeah.
Let's use them. Let's use them to learn. Let's use them to share. There's so many inspirational stories. If the news that you're watching is so negative and so depleting and so like de-energizing and whatever, well, find something else, right? Change the channel, right? Change the food, go outside. Students say, well, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed. Like you said, go outside. That's the thing you should do. That's the first thing you should do. Put the book down, go get some fresh air, and 10 minutes later, you'll come back and you'll be refreshed. You'll be in a better state of mind. But if you're going to sit there, and we all did it, I did it. You're sitting there reading your book and you're just like, oh, I got to finish this page. I got 2 more pages I got to read. It's like, no, you are not productive. You are forcing yourself to learn. That's not productive. So go outside. Go outside. There's a great song by a group of youth in Montana, and it's Go Outside. That's the song. It's
That's our
go,
anthem.
go. I can't sing it. I'm terrible at singing. But it's like go, and like go. What? Like 5 minutes later, outside. That's the answer.
Amen. I mean, it's the first step, isn't it? You'll meet people, you'll see your neighborhood, you'll start caring about things. And I totally agree. I feel like education right now is getting a bad rap. Like, the more you learn about the climate crisis, the more depressed you're going to get. But I haven't found that to be the truth at all. Like, yes, the facts are very scary and we should be scared. It's a good motivator. But the more I learn about what's being done and the causes that I can join in my neighborhood, the more hope I have. So absolutely love it. We're getting some questions in the chat here. Let's see. So some really cool questions. I'm going to try to get to all of them. Do either of you have an opinion? Elizabeth asks, do either of you have an opinion on the legal rights of nature movement? Are either of you familiar with that movement? I believe it's related to, let's see, legal rights of nature. Oh, acidification.
Well, there is a country. Is it Colombia? I think, or Bolivia. Bolivia passed in their constitution. They passed the rights of nature. I think they're the first country to do that. I think a few others have followed suit. And it is just, as anything, our constitution is only how we enforce it, right? But it is a goal. And so the notion is, if we afford the rights of life and existence to all life, we would not be doing what we've been doing, right? The Sixth Fest, the whole point of this conference is to recognize that we are living during a mass extinction. It's hard it doesn't make us feel good to know that, but monarch butterflies were almost non-existent in Galesburg last summer. And I have a in my front yard, right? I'm the revolutionary that put a way station for monarch butterflies there 4 years ago. And I get letters from the city saying my lawn is too long. Okay. But I'm like, it's okay. I still got elected somehow.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
because I know how voting machines work. Anyway, the point is, this is serious, right? Where did these butterflies go? So we have to recognize that, yes, this is our moment, right? We don't get to live in the civil rights movement, right? Oh, hold on a second. There's a second wave of civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do, right? So for all of us who, wonder, well, what would I have done during slavery, or what would I have done during the civil rights movement? Well, now you get your chance. You don't have to think about what I would have done. What are you doing, right? There's a great book. It's like there's anti-racism and there's racism. There is no middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
right? I would encourage people to read that book, because either you're practicing anti-racism on a daily basis or you're a racist, okay? And you could argue that in environmental terms. You're either an environmentalist or you're an anti-environmentalist. There is no middle ground, right? You can't pretend like you don't know anything. It just doesn't exist. So, and I'm not trying to create guilt. I'm trying to create opportunity. Go to bed. Think about this. Brush your teeth. Hopefully you brush your teeth every night before you go to bed, right? You're looking in the mirror and you look at yourself. Did I do good today? Did I do what I could? Did I make the world better? Did I make the world better for me and my family, and then my community, my neighborhood? If you can say yes, you're going to sleep. Boom. You're going to hit the pillow and you're going to be gone. You're going to have some serious good REMs. Okay. And I think, everybody's got to have their metric, but that's kind of a metric I have. And I'm not trying to claim that I'm somehow done all this great stuff, but you have to live with yourself. We all do. And that's all you can do, right? That's all you have. That's whatever in your body. But guess what? You have more. This is another crazy fact. You have more species in your body, cells of other organisms, than you have human cells. What? What did he say? Okay, yeah, I'll blow your mind. So you are a multi-organism. So make good use of it. Anyway, that's my list.
Bro, love it. No,
I can't go after that. I can't.
It's okay. Well, you touched on something that I wanted to touch on, and actually one of our questions in the chat touched on as well, is that the civil rights movement is inextricable from the environmental movement. Not only are Native land protectors and Black people and people of color, and not only have they been at the forefront of this fight for a very long time, but they are the most affected, which is often why they're at the forefront of this fight. So for people, living in the States where we have a fairly high standard of living, can either of you speak to, the effects that this is going to have on people who, in, for example, what we call third world countries, or people living in this country in areas that are food deserts, or how is this already affecting them in ways that maybe white people like me might not be seeing?
Peter, it's we all have to acknowledge that it's Black and brown bodies have been marginalized, subjugated, enslaved, in large part for the environmental, social, and cultural benefit of white people since, for 400 years. And, the real, what is really, here's another thing that's giving me hope is we're having that discussion right now as a country for the first time. Peter, you remember when you first started teaching environmental justice. I remember when I started teaching food justice, just in the last 10 years, how much the scholarship has changed, how much people's mindsets have changed. Now, there's a long way to go, right? But when I was in graduate school, our general thinking was like, hey, man, Civil Rights Act finished up a lot of that, right? And now we know, through not only because of the work of some great scholars of color and thinkers that like, dude, we're just in a continuum to a period of mass incarceration. And when you really look at these epics, you see that these systems of oppression are still in place, and they've evolved. And as important, they're the subjugation of Black and brown people, and the marginalization of Black and brown people is hand in hand with the environment. Right, it all goes back. It does all go back to capitalism, and man, there might have been one book on environmental justice 15 years ago when I first started teaching, and now I can't even. I'm actually rewriting my whole food justice course for the first time because I was like, the shit that I taught 5 years ago, it's no longer relevant. Because of the profound changes to the consciousness of American society and the realities of just how much further we have to go when we think about a more holistic view of justice when it comes to like Earth's creatures being all of us in humanity, but also it's flora and fauna. And it is exciting to see these issues being raised in ways that they weren't even 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I would just throw in, my introduction to environmental justice was through a course that I teach with a colleague at Knox, Conrad Hamilton. And on a whim, probably 2005, I said, let's take a field trip to Chicago. And he was like, are you sure? I said, yeah, let's just do it. That's kind of the way I was about things. And so I didn't know about the groups. So I got online using the internet and I found some groups and they were in communities of color. We're doing all the amazing stuff. And so then I took students there and I did my sabbatical in one of them, and it completely changed me as a human being. It made me more civically oriented. It made me realize that you have to work locally and you can't use all the excuses. These people, they have 2 jobs. They have bigger families. Many of them don't speak English as well as I do, in the traditional sense, but yet that's not stopping them from making sure that they have clean air and clean water and food for their families and yada, yada, and the list goes on. It's like every excuse I have, no, I'm privileged. So let me turn that on in a positive way. And so they taught me. So this goes back to my earlier comment. In order for us to self-actualize as human beings, we actually have to go where we think we don't need to go. Because in fact, the people who have been most oppressed, most smushed are the people who are coming up with the most innovative ideas, in my opinion. And it's not that we don't have ideas, but we have so much to learn. And we don't, the fact that I realized that I'd been in Galesburg for 5, 6, 7 years, and I had no idea that these communities existed or what they were doing until I just happened to type in something on the internet. That realization that that's how close I was to learning. It was just, that's how close. And so you have to realize it exists. There are people who are struggling and making great sacrifice and making progress. So go to an urban farm, in Inglewood. You want to know where urban farms are really blowing up? In Inglewood. But if you listen to the news, Inglewood is where everybody's getting shot.
Right.
So white people don't want to go to Inglewood. Well, no, be the white person that goes to Inglewood, right? Go into and work for the farm and meet those people and and become friends with them and realize that you're both human beings living in the same city, a couple miles apart, using the same subway, drinking the same water, right? Dealing with the same transportation system. So all of that builds community, that really, and I love the way you said it, like you went out and you cleaned up and it gave you like a sense of satisfaction. You will feel it when people do that. You will feel like you are a human in a way you've not realized. So I would, connect yourself to these movements because it is a big movement. It's a life movement in a way. I think it really is. Like, how do you deal with extinction? Life is the antithesis, right? So that's the movement that's gonna bring us, salvation in some form.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we might have just got a new one in here. One of our questions was, when we're talking to, and it's great that both of you have worked with young people, when we're talking to young people, especially children, about the climate crisis, there's a lot of fear messaging. And how do we talk to them about this? And I think this actually extends to like the general population. Like, what's the best way that you found to talk to people about this in a way that's like really accessible, maybe specifically for children, but also just people in your work, like Peter, people in Galesburg, or Nick, people that you're selling fish to, who might not be super connected to the environmental side of things. How do you pull them in? What's the hook?
I'd be curious to know Peter's answer for Galesburg.
Nick always leads off. He gets to see the pictures first.
Smart.
I think that I was campaigning, right? And I was knocking on doors and not knowing who was going to answer the door. And my messaging had to change like every minute or two. Like, what was the message? I had to kind of try to read a person, looking at their yard, looking at their house, and you make wrong assumptions all the time. So you have to ask them, what's important to you? And I think once you get to know somebody a little bit, then you can share with them what's important. If the economy is important to them, well, you can tell them. And I was just speaking to the Rotary last week. This notion that somehow economics and environmental benefit are in opposition is just a total lie. It's a total falsehood. In fact, it's the exact opposite. And that's what Nick's talking about. Why the companies are finding that they're wasting all this money because they're being totally inefficient and wasteful and ignoring all of this throughput that they don't need, right? So that might mean something to them. I would say, to a child, I think wonder and amazement with nature, there's nothing that can beat that. Forget about all this other stuff. There is so much wonder and amazement, and unfortunately, our children have been inside on their machines, on their phones. They are losing that, and if we cannot lose that as a humanity. We need wonder and amazement, and they say there's studies that show like the people who are the most ardent environmentalists, who dedicate their lives to improving the environment for all, are the people who spend the most time outside, right? In unstructured activities. That's the cue. That's a little weird. It seems weird. Let kids play in the mud. Let them get dirty. Let them chase the butterfly. Let them bring the salamander home if they can find one. Let them, go out and stargaze. These are things that kids have to do, right? And we can encourage, like we can put the little, the little bait.
The breadcrumbs.
Right? Yeah, we can put the breadcrumbs and they'll go there, right? They'll go there because it's wonder and amazement. And there is so much wonder and amazement. And if people if they see wonder and amazement in life, in real life, there's no computer game that can satisfy that, right? There's no manipulated advertisement that's going to sell them something that can replace that. So to me, for the youth, that's what and I'm not saying I'm an expert at it, But there's a gentleman in Chicago, by the way, I can't think of his name, but he writes books for children about the environment. And it's some of the best stuff I've ever seen. And so I can't think of his name. But that was his foundation, that he had to write books that draw like with colors and of course there's a lesson, but it's the kids want to turn the page because there's something amazing that's going to happen in nature.
Love it. Thank you. Nick, how do you speak to people who are looking to maybe like buy into Sitka Salmon shares? What's the website has some really cool language that I've gone through.
Wild foods are the most climate friendly foods there are. It's a direct, when we think about like food systems and we think about like, how should we be eating in the most climate friendly ways, I'm somewhat ambivalent to all of these, new plant-based foods, right, that are highly processed or grown, cellular aquaculture, as they now call it, or cellular meat production, right? The most climate friendly way and the most environmentally friendly way, right, is to take how can you most efficiently turn the sun's energy into your body, right? And it's through, either eating plants, or also if you want protein, right? It's getting, wild foods from that don't require inputs or human labor or chemicals or oil to produce them, but rather it's the sun's energy direct to your body. And that's that to me is always like a profound connection that people make, right? With the plant-based food craze, Impossible Burger, Beyond Meat, like, how, look, there's no doubt that's better than a lot of industrial produced agriculture. But when you really get back at its core, what's the best way to eat? And it's about taking the sun's energy and putting it directly in your body with as few steps as possible and without much human intervention. And so then you get to, Peter's lot in Galesburg, or as many lots in Galesburg, or you get to these, to foraged and wild harvested foods, which you don't have to, water, or you don't have to put chemicals on, or you don't have to transform through, chemical processes or industrial processes or manufacturing processes. So that always, lights people's eyes up. But also, with climate change too, the oceans are a bellwether, right? The things that are happening on land, they're happening more quickly and more significantly in the oceans. And of course, ocean acidification, but also, radically changing ocean currents, surface seawater temperatures, biomass changes. And, I've been seeing, of course, wild fisheries are incredibly dynamic and uncertain, but, in our last 5 years of doing business, it's the models with which these biomasses were pretty accurately interpreted for about 50 years have just totally started breaking down because of things like acidification, because of things like surface seawater temperature changes, because of things like if you heard the blob, right? Which is this, just giant kind of ocean temperature anomalies that sort of appear out of nowhere, but it might be because of some current, because of course, in the Arctic and the Antarctic is ice melt and are melting ice caps and not having the same both winter and summer extent of our ice in both the north and the south, and the radical changes that are taking place to oceans and life in the oceans there. So those two things always help, I think, really hit home. Climate change hit home for people, right? When I do a little talk a lot about, look, when it affects our plates, right? That's when people start making those connections, when climate change affects our plates, and it increasingly is. And even with all these plant-based foods, I mean, there's a reason why that's happening because, industrial meat production is no longer viable. It's no longer viable, more so than this being a technological solution to eating industrial meat. Increasingly, it's no longer a viable source of food. And if it is, it's not for much longer. So
I think very good to end on a note of warning and hope. I have so many really cool sort of bullet points to come out of this with, and I hope our viewers do too. You heard it here, folks. You got to get small, you got to get slow, you got to root in, find your home, and make connections with human beings in the world around you. I want to thank you both so much. I feel like we covered a lot and there's so much more we could cover. But in our short amount of time, I'm so grateful for what you've shared with us and for coming and sharing with the Sixth Festival. Folks watching at home, if you enjoyed this, it's being recorded. You can share it with your friends and family, share it with your classes if you're a teacher. We'll bleep out that one shit that Nick said and it'll be fine. And that one that I just said too. You can share it with your kids.
I can't believe I didn't get one in. Come on now.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
But yeah, thank you again, folks. And thank you all for watching at home. I so appreciate it. Go outside.
Thank you, Claire.
Bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
guys.
Thanks, Nick.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank
Claire.
you.
Bye, Nick.